Expanding the IRS has become a big midterm issue with the economy in free fall and inflation not letting up. The Wall Street Journal reports, quote, Republican control of either the House or Senate could jeopardize the Biden administration's plans to expand the Internal Revenue Service, with GOP lawmakers positioned to withhold funding should they gain power. Joining us this morning to discuss, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Brandon, great to see you this morning. Welcome back to the National Desk. Democrats in Congress did pass that $80 billion IRS expansion. Republicans unanimously opposed it. First, let's break down the Democrats' goal with this expansion.
Yeah, I mean, their primary goal is to get more revenue. They had this enormous bill, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which I don't think will reduce inflation, I should say. But the goal was to pay for that. And they thought this was an easy political way to do so. They don't have to raise tax rates. They can just be more aggressive in their enforcement of tax provisions, tax laws, and go after people with more audits, more harassment, more angry letters to try to drive up the amount of revenue they bring in to pay for this massive piece of legislation. That's what they're trying to do here. And that's why Republicans were so strongly opposed, because they do not want to see the IRS supersized and going after everyday citizens.
Now, the Biden administration and congressional Democrats say the IRS will only go after big corporations and the wealthiest Americans. You say that's not true because you have some stats here. 71% of the tax gap is attributed to the individual side of the tax code. Less than 5% of the tax gap actually comes from large corporations. Explain what you mean by closing the tax gap and why this will affect middle America.
Sure. Well, the tax gap is the difference between what is owed in taxes and what is actually paid to the Treasury each year. And we know that the tax gap is substantial. I don't know if it's quite as large as some of the Democrats have alleged, with trillion-dollar figures being tossed out there. But yeah, people who owe taxes should pay their taxes. Plain and simple. But the mechanisms that they want to utilize to go after people, I think, are inherently unfair and have been traditionally very problematic. For instance, you look at things like the Earned Income Tax Credit. This is a tax benefit that goes to the working poor, people who are barely scraping by in a very tough economic situation. We see the audit rates for this program are significantly higher, so they're going after the working poor and leaving some upper income folks untouched. So I think this just shows you the inherent problems at the IRS. They go after people that they see as easy money. It's much easier to get additional tax revenue out of people who cannot afford to hire attorneys, who do not have sophisticated accountants, who can't fight back the way that large corporations and the wealthy traditionally can. That's what's problematic here.
And to your point, small businesses or these pass-through companies make up about 58% of the tax gap. And we know small businesses have taken numerous hits since the start of the pandemic. How will they be affected by the expansion? And explain to us how this affects the person who might not look like they're making $400,000 a year because they have that pass-through company, but in fact, they're the ones who are going to be hit.
Yeah, I mean, pass-through entities are the biggest concern, in my opinion, here, because they've been just absolutely devastated by the pandemic. We've seen so many small businesses close shop. They've had difficulty with inflation, with higher labor costs. So this is really an unfortunate provision to have the IRS undoubtedly target these individuals, because while they may be good at running their small businesses, whether that's a bakery, a coffee shop, a bike shop, you name it, they're not necessarily dedicated to their taxes the way that large corporations are, because they don't have the resources to hire those accountants, hire those tax attorneys. So when they get a letter from the IRS saying, hey, we think you owe some additional tax dollars, whether that's $500, $5,000, $50,000. A lot of these small businesses say, I don't want to fight the IRS. The IRS is big and powerful. I don't have the resources to do so. It's easier for me to just pay that additional amount, even if it's a decent sized chunk of change, than to fight back. Even if they are absolutely right and they've made no mistakes on their taxes whatsoever, oftentimes they'll just pony up. And that's very, very concerning for people that don't have the ability to fight the IRS.
And customer service issues have also been a major concern with the IRS. We know agents are overworked. They're facing this huge backlog of tax filings already. Now, the IRS did receive $2 billion last year to address some of these frustrating issues, but they really just lack some of the basic technology to fix some of these underlying problems. What kind of modernization strategies do you think are necessary? What should be done?
Yeah, I mean, technology is a huge factor here. The IRS has been very resistant to efforts to modernize, and that should be the primary effort. Unfortunately, with the Inflation Reduction Act, only 4%, less than 4% of the dollars are going to improve taxpayer services. We need to fix their software. They're using decades-old software that in some cases portions of the IRS can't communicate with other portions of the IRS because their software is so old. About 70% of the printers at the IRS are outdated and broken. They've been resistant to efforts to go to electronic scanning of tax returns, paper tax returns, rather than doing manual transcription. Manual transcription is incredibly labor intensive. It takes so much time and effort. Again, they've resisted all these efforts. Congress needs to get tough with the IRS, force them to implement these modernization efforts rather than just shoveling dollars, crossing their fingers and hope that they improve, because they haven't.
Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold, thanks for joining us this morning. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks, Jan. You too.